It started with a single letter, and ended with police sirens, chaos, and the loudest scream our quiet neighborhood had ever heard. When the HOA president broke into my mailbox and faked a bee allergy to frame me, she had no idea I'd caught every second on camera. What happened next not only destroyed her reputation, it ended her rule forever. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss these true-style neighborhood dramas where justice always stings a little sweeter. Every neighborhood begins with promises. Neat hedges, trimmed lawns, and smiles exchanged between neighbors who believe peace will last forever. Ours looked that way once. Rows of pastel houses standing shoulder to shoulder beneath maple trees, mailboxes painted the same cheerful shade of silver, the faint scent of cut grass drifting through summer evenings. It was a picture of calm suburbia, a place where nothing ugly ever happened. Until the woman across the street decided to run everything like her personal kingdom. Her name was Karen Johnson, and in the beginning, no one thought much about her. She waved politely during morning walks and offered tips about fertilizer and recycling schedules. But beneath her sugary tone lived a hunger for control that would soon devour our quiet street. When the old HOA president retired, everyone wanted peace, not paperwork, so they voted her in by default. That single decision transformed a friendly association into an empire ruled by one self-appointed queen. The first changes came dressed as improvements. New community rules printed on glossy paper slipped neatly under each door. At first they sounded harmless. Lawn decorations must remain tasteful, trash cans must be hidden from view, driveways must be power washed once a month. Everyone chuckled, agreed half-heartedly, and returned to their routines. Then the letters multiplied. Week after week, a new edict appeared, each one more ridiculous than the last. Suddenly, Christmas lights had to come down within 72 hours after the holiday. Fences could not exceed precisely 3 feet 6 inches. Front doors were limited to 5 shades of beige chosen by Karen herself. It was as if color, joy, and individuality had become crimes punishable by citation. Her golf cart became the sound of dread. A high-pitched whir announcing inspections no one had requested. Every wheel squeak meant someone was about to receive a warning taped neatly to their door. At first, neighbors treated her like an annoyance. They whispered across lawns, laughed about her obsession, and rolled their eyes. But laughter turned to silence when the fines arrived. $50 for a garden gnome deemed unesthetic. $75 for leaving a hose uncoiled. $100 for parking a guest car 1 inch beyond the curb line. The money wasn't the real damage, it was the intimidation. Karen's power came from fear, and fear spread faster than rumor. I watched the neighborhood change. People who once waved began to avoid eye contact. Curtains stayed closed longer. Children no longer drew chalk rainbows on driveways. Their parents scrubbed the color away before she could photograph it. The community bulletin board, once filled with bake sale flyers, now carried warnings about HOA compliance updates. Each printed page carried her signature, a looping cursive swirl ending in a smiley face that somehow looked like a threat. From my porch, I saw the transformation happen like rot under paint. We had all built lives here believing home was sanctuary, but now every mailbox felt like a checkpoint and every flower bed a potential violation. Karen ruled with a smile, patrolling in her golf cart with a clipboard clutched like a weapon. She enforced silence, conformity, and obedience. Then came the letter that crossed every line imaginable. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, folded crisp inside a white envelope stamped with the HOA logo, a cartoon sun beaming over perfect hedges. Across the top, bold black words declared, Article 7, Section 4B, Mailbox Hygiene and Security Inspections. The announcement claimed that due to increasing incidents of mail theft, the HOA had voted to conduct random unannounced inspections of every resident's mailbox. It was written in the same cheerful tone she always used, as if the invasion of federal property were a community service. The message was short, smug, and absolute. Every homeowner was required to comply. Failure would result in disciplinary action and possible fines. At the bottom, the smiley face signature appeared again, but this time it felt like a sneer. I stood at the curb reading that letter while sunlight glared off the identical mailboxes lining the street. Every house had the same envelope taped to its door. Across the road, Karen's curtains twitched. She was watching to see who would obey first. For a long moment, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The old man 2 doors down peeled his notice off carefully, folded it with trembling hands, and disappeared inside. The young couple next door read theirs in silence, glanced nervously toward Karen's house, then slipped it into the trash without a word. One by one, doors closed. Defeat spread like a chill through the evening air. That was when I realized this was no longer about community standard. It was about domination. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was testing how much power she could seize before anyone dared to resist. Mailboxes were sacred territory, protected by federal law, but she knew most people wouldn't risk confrontation. Fear was cheaper than courage. I remember the metallic taste of anger rising as I looked at that envelope. The words weren't just ink on paper. They were a declaration that our privacy, our autonomy, even our mail belonged to her now. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. I walked the street that evening noticing details I had ignored for years. The perfect symmetry of lawns looked less like pride and more like submission. The silence of neighbors felt heavy, like the pause before a storm. Through open windows came the faint buzz of televisions reporting distant scandals, yet the real tyranny was right here, small-scale, polite, and absolutely suffocating. In the days that followed, Karen's presence intensified. Her golf cart patrolled at dawn and again at dusk. She carried a camera now, photographing mailboxes as if documenting crime scenes. Residents began checking their mail at odd hours to avoid her. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when her cart appeared. I installed new cameras on my porch, not out of paranoia but preparation. Because deep down I knew she wouldn't stop at letters. She wanted obedience she could see, proof that her rules shaped every motion on our street. And I had no intention of giving her that satisfaction. The peace that once defined our neighborhood was gone, replaced by a quiet tension that hummed beneath every ordinary task. Collecting mail felt like defiance. Mowing the lawn felt like surveillance. Karen's kingdom was built on intimidation, and her subjects were learning to live inside it. Yet every tyrant eventually crosses a line they can't uncross. The letter about mailbox inspections was that line. It wasn't a rule, it was a spark. And though most neighbors turned away, pretending not to notice, I couldn't. There are moments when silence becomes guilt, when compliance becomes surrender. Standing at the curb with that envelope in my hand, I decided I would not surrender. Some wars begin with armies, others with words. Ours began with a single envelope taped to a door. From that day forward, the sound of Karen's golf cart no longer filled me with dread. It fueled determination. I began collecting evidence. Videos, documents, every absurd notice she issued. My wife joined quietly, cataloging timestamps, photographing violations of her own, the times she trespassed, the moments she lingered at mailboxes too long. We didn't speak of revenge then. We spoke of boundaries, of dignity, of the law she believed she stood above. The neighborhood slept under her watch, unaware that resistance was already forming. Beneath the trimmed lawns and identical mailboxes, something was shifting, a slow, steady current of quiet defiance. Karen thought she ruled a village of compliant subjects. She didn't realize she was standing on a fuse. It would only take one spark to light it. And soon, she would provide it herself. The morning after the letter arrived, the neighborhood looked the same but felt entirely different. Beneath the quiet hum of sprinklers and chirping birds, a new kind of unease pulsed through the air. It was the sound of people trying not to make noise. The sound of fear learning to whisper. Mailboxes had become symbols of suspicion. Every time someone reached for their mail, they glanced over their shoulder first, scanning for the golf cart. Even the children who played on driveways seemed to move more carefully, as if the street itself had ears. Karen's plan was working exactly as she intended. Fear is invisible but effective. It doesn't have to shout. It just needs to linger long enough to make people second-guess their freedom. And by claiming authority over something as personal as a mailbox, she had crossed into territory that went beyond rules and regulations. She was declaring ownership over privacy itself. For a few days, I watched in silence, documenting everything. Each morning, Karen made her rounds, clipboard in hand, peering into mailboxes like she was inspecting military equipment. Her posture was rigid, proud, satisfied. She wasn't enforcing cleanliness, she was enforcing submission. Every mailbox she touched became another citizen under her reign. Neighbors pretended not to notice. They smiled, nodded, and obeyed. Compliance was easier than confrontation. It always is, until it isn't. That's when I realized something crucial. Rules like hers survive because people let them. Not because they're right, but because no one wants to be the first to resist. Fear is contagious, but so is courage. And if no one else would draw the line, then it would have to be me. It started small, quiet acts of preparation. I went through our HOA agreement line by line, looking for loopholes. There was no mention of mailbox inspections anywhere. Not one clause gave the HOA any authority to open or touch mailboxes. Federal law was clear. Tampering with or accessing another person's mailbox was a criminal offense. It wasn't a gray area. It was black and white, sealed in ink long before Karen's signature ever appeared on her phony letterhead. Still, I needed more than outrage. I needed proof. So, I began keeping a record. Photographs of every new notice, timestamps of every patrol, detailed logs of when and where she stopped. I positioned our home security cameras to capture the street corner where the community mailboxes stood. My wife updated a shared folder each night with screenshots and dates. Together, we were building a case before we even knew it. But the line between caution and obsession is thin. I found myself watching the footage late into the night, scanning shadows for her golf cart headlights, replaying clips where she paused too long near a mailbox. Each glimpse felt like confirmation of what I already knew. She wouldn't stop. She believed she was untouchable. Days passed. The neighborhood kept shrinking into itself. Mailboxes were checked at dawn or after dark. Conversations between neighbors ended abruptly when her cart appeared. Even the breeze seemed nervous. And then, one evening, I saw something that changed everything. From my porch, I watched as Karen's cart stopped in front of the house 2 doors down. It was Mr. Henderson's, an older man who'd lived here longer than anyone. He was quiet, kind, the type who waved at everyone and spent afternoons pruning his roses. She climbed out, clipboard tucked under one arm, and stared at his mailbox for a long time. Then, without hesitation, she lifted the lid. It was quick, maybe 5 seconds, but it was enough. The moment was mundane to anyone else, but to me, it felt electric. It proved that her so-called inspections weren't rumors. They were happening. That image burned into my mind like a warning flare. If she was bold enough to do it there, she'd do it anywhere. And sooner or later, she'd come for mine. I knew the next move had to be strategic, not emotional. I couldn't confront her yet. Confrontation was what she wanted. It would give her a story, something to twist. Every tyrant thrives on the narrative of being attacked by rebels. I couldn't give her that. Instead, I decided to watch quietly and wait. As the days stretched on, the evidence built itself. Small details added up like drops of poison filling a glass. She wasn't just invading privacy. She was testing limits, daring someone to challenge her authority. And every time no one did, she grew bolder. By the end of the week, she had transformed the HOA from an organization into a theater, one where she played both the enforcer and the victim, rewriting the script to make herself the hero. Every neighborhood email she sent was drenched in false professionalism, sprinkled with phrases like safety compliance and community integrity. But beneath those polite words lived a hunger for validation, for control. She wasn't protecting us. She was performing for us, waiting for applause. It was on a Saturday morning when the idea of resistance finally crystallized in my mind. I stood beside our mailbox, coffee in hand, staring at the dull metal surface that had suddenly become the center of a battle I hadn't asked for. Around me, the street was quiet, yet the silence felt charged, as if the houses themselves were holding their breath. I imagined her standing there, her hand on the latch, her face bent in satisfaction as she opened what didn't belong to her. The image triggered something in me that wasn't anger but clarity. She had drawn the line, but I was going to redraw it. That day, I began planning the defense, not of my mailbox but of my dignity. I started researching legal precedents, reading stories of postal inspectors handling similar cases. I learned that tampering with mailboxes carried serious consequences, even for minor infractions. It wasn't something that ended with a fine. It ended with investigations, citations, sometimes even arrests. Knowing that filled me with calm purpose. I didn't need revenge yet. I needed precision. If I was going to stand up to her, it had to be in a way she couldn't spin, deny, or escape. But first, I needed to understand her. Karen's behavior wasn't random. It followed a pattern, the slow tightening of control disguised as maintenance or policy enforcement. She had started with small rules because small rules teach obedience. Once people accept those, the bigger ones slide in unnoticed. Mailboxes were her final step, the proof that she owned not just our lawns, but our private lives. By the end of that week, the line in the sand was no longer metaphorical. It was real, drawn in my mind with absolute clarity. If she touched my mailbox, I would make sure every camera, every document, every second of footage turned into the evidence that ended her reign. I didn't realize it then, but resistance, once begun, has a momentum of its own. It starts quietly, a single decision, a single refusal, but it grows. Like roots under pavement, it spreads unseen until it cracks the surface. That night, I sat by the window, lights off, watching the street. The air was still. The faint hum of a golf cart echoed in the distance, closer with each turn. Then, through the branches, I saw it, the faint glint of headlights reflecting off polished metal. Her cart. She passed slowly, inspecting the mailboxes like a queen inspecting her subject. The sound of her wheels was small, but in that silence, it felt enormous. And then, as quickly as she came, she was gone. But in her wake, something shifted. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. The war she had quietly started with a letter was about to become something else entirely, a contest between power and proof, between lies and law. She believed fear would keep everyone silent. She was wrong. The neighborhood was silent that night, the kind of silence that only exists in planned communities. Heavy, ordered, and somehow unnatural. Every window glowed faintly behind drawn curtains. Every lawn was trimmed to exact perfection. But beneath that perfection, something rotten pulsed. Karen's power had infected everything. By now, the fear she had planted had taken root deep in every house. Neighbors no longer waved. The sound of her golf cart rolling past had become the new neighborhood clock, marking time through intimidation. She was everywhere, yet nowhere. Her influence lived in the corners of people's minds, whispering reminders that resistance came with consequences. I had spent the past few nights documenting her movements, learning her patterns. Her patrols were clockwork, precise, almost military. She started each evening from her driveway at 8 p.m., gliding through the same circuit of streets, clipboard in hand, always stopping by the community mail kiosk before returning home. I knew something was happening there, something deliberate. It wasn't enough to suspect her anymore. I needed to see it. That Friday night, I parked my car a few houses away from the mailboxes. From a distance, it looked like every other night, still, quiet, predictable. But my heartbeat was loud enough to feel in my throat. The dashboard clock glowed 10:48 p.m. The world beyond the windshield was bathed in sodium orange light from the lone street lamp that flickered like a dying candle. I waited. An hour passed. My coffee went cold. The street remained empty, and doubt began to creep in. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe paranoia was feeding on itself, building stories out of shadows. Then I heard it. The faint, unmistakable whir of electric tires on pavement. Her golf cart appeared from the far corner of the cul-de-sac, lights off, coasting in silence like a predator that already knew the outcome. She wore dark clothes this time, not the pastel sweaters of her daytime patrols. Her hair was tied back tightly. She wasn't here to inspect, she was here to hide. Through the windshield, I saw her stop at the mail kiosk. She stepped out slowly, scanning both sides of the street. Her movements were cautious, rehearsed. She looked like someone who had done this before. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a set of keys. Not ordinary house keys, larger, silver, industrial. The sight froze me. With a single turn, she unlocked the large master panel that held all 16 mailboxes together. The entire front swung open like a cabinet door, revealing rows of personal boxes, the private mail of every household on the block. I leaned forward instinctively, disbelief pressing against the glass. How did she even get that key? Postal master keys weren't handed out to anyone. They were controlled, tracked, federal property. It wasn't possible. And yet there she was, turning through letters under a flickering light like a thief dressed in authority. She wasn't inspecting for hygiene. She was reading. I could see the white envelopes glinting as she angled her flashlight over each name. Occasionally she'd pause, tilting her head, as if memorizing a sender or checking for patterns. Every movement screamed entitlement. This wasn't curiosity. It was surveillance. The quiet felt suffocating. My mind raced. I knew I should stay hidden, collect proof, report it later. But adrenaline overruled logic. Years of silent frustration erupted all at once. I opened my car door and stepped out. The sound of my shoes on the pavement echoed across the empty street. She froze. The flashlight beam jerked, slicing through the dark. For a second our eyes met, hers wide, mine steady. The moment was electric. In that split second, I realized exactly what she would do next. And I was right. Her expression shifted instantly from guilt to performance. The flashlight clattered to the ground, rolling in a circle of light. She stumbled backward, clutching her phone, pressing record. Her voice rose in exaggerated panic, loud enough for any potential witness. A trap. And like a fool, I had stepped into it. A pair of headlights appeared at the end of the street, another car, arriving fast. It pulled up sharply beside her golf cart. Out stepped Barry, one of her most loyal HOA followers, the kind of man who confused obedience for virtue. His face was flushed, his breathing heavy, as he ran toward her like a knight summoned by his queen. He was part of the plan. She must have called him the moment she saw me leave my driveway. Under the harsh glow of the streetlight, the scene unfolded like a bad play. Karen pointed toward me, her face twisted in exaggerated terror. Barry puffed up his chest, positioning himself between us like a bodyguard. Her voice carried across the still air, full of tremor and accusation. I could see the performance for what it was, a setup designed to create a story where she was the victim and I was the aggressor. Her camera was rolling. Barry was her witness. The master key still dangled in the open panel behind her, but now that didn't matter. She had crafted a scene of harassment, and I had given her the opening she needed. I turned away, forcing calm into my steps, but it was too late. In the shadows, she continued her show, gasping dramatically as Barry shouted for me to leave her alone. The more I ignored them, the louder she became, ensuring her phone captured the harassment she had engineered. By the time I made it back to my driveway, my hands were shaking with fury. Across the street, her golf cart lights flared back on. She left the mail kiosk open for a moment longer, then slammed the panel shut and sped away, victory radiating from her posture. That night, I stared at the porch camera footage over and over. It captured part of the confrontation, me stepping toward the light, her staggering theatrically, Barry arriving seconds later. To anyone who didn't know the truth, it could look incriminating. It was her word against mine, and her version already had a video to back it. The next morning, she made her victory official. A new email hit the neighborhood inboxes, written in her usual tone of polite tyranny. It warned residents about aggressive behavior toward HOA officers and reminded everyone of respectful compliance. No names were mentioned, she didn't need to. Everyone knew who she meant. I became the villain of her story overnight. Neighbors who used to wave now hesitated. Conversations died when I walked by. The silence that once protected her now isolated me. But beneath that isolation, something solidified, a resolve sharper than anger. She had used lies and manipulation to protect herself before, but this time she had crossed a federal line. Tampering with mail wasn't a policy violation, it was a felony. She had filmed me, yes, but I had seen her with that key. And if I could prove what she was doing, every ounce of her power would collapse under the weight of the law she pretended to uphold. The footage of her opening the master panel wasn't clear enough from my car, but it was something. Enough to start a trail. Enough to get attention. My wife, calm as always, reminded me that the best revenge wasn't loud, it was lawful. We began cataloging every second of what I'd seen, reconstructing the scene in detail, gathering every scrap of proof we could. Because I knew this wouldn't be the last time she touched that mailbox. People like her never stop after one victory. They crave the next one and the next, until they finally choke on their own arrogance. All I had to do was wait. The neighborhood looked peaceful again that weekend, but it was the peace of tension, not tranquility. Behind every curtain, people whispered about the incident. Karen wore her false victimhood like a crown, parading through the streets in her golf cart again, waving sweetly at those who pitied her. But her time was running out, because while she thought she had silenced me, I was already planning her undoing. And the next time she reached for my mailbox, she wouldn't just find letters inside. She would find her own downfall waiting, buzzing, harmless, and unforgettable. After the confrontational night at the kiosk, strategy replaced fury. Anger is combustible and brief. Patience and precision build consequences that last. The obvious trap, public yelling, a direct fight, a viral meltdown, would only feed her narrative machine. A smarter approach required law, evidence, and a plan that could not be spun away with a shaky camera angle or an actor's tear. What looked like chaos needed to be converted into airtight proof. The first move was to understand the enemy. Karen's power lived in performance and paperwork. She used theatrics to manufacture sympathy and authority to manufacture compliance. The plan had to exploit both her confidence and her need to control the story. It also had to respect the boundary the law clearly drew. There could be no booby traps, no dangerous surprises, nothing that could be twisted into a criminal act by the very person who'd already twisted truth for sport. So the plan took shape around three pillars: legality, observation, and provocation that left no room for ambiguity. Legality meant consulting official channels and learning exactly what constituted tampering. Observation required cameras and timestamps and multiple independent viewpoints. Provocation needed to be theatrical enough to force her hand, but harmless enough to avoid any charge that we had set out to harm anyone. Research became the quiet work of late nights. The U.S. Postal Inspection Service policies and statutes were read and reread. Legal language can be thick and slow, but it also offers clarity. A mailbox is not a suggestion. Tampering with the contents, opening another person's assigned door, or using a postal key without authorization were criminal acts. Those words felt like armor. They also suggested one thing plainly: if she could be caught on video deliberately reaching into someone's assigned box and rifling through contents, even after clear warning, the law would be on the complainant's side. The next pillar, surveillance, was technical but simple. Redundancy is the backbone of solid proof. One camera can be edited. Two cameras with synchronized timestamps make edits harder to defend. My wife rebuilt our existing system into a small, precise surveillance network. A high-resolution camera mounted in the garage window gave a wide angle of the mailbox cluster. A discreet pinhole cam slipped into the kiosk trim captured up-close motion at the exact door. An outdoor microphone disguised as a decorative rock picked up sounds, the rustle of paper, the intake of breath, the cadence of footsteps. Every device saved footage to a secure drive with tamper-evident timestamp. Then came the provocation, the theatrical element that would force the choice. It had to be obvious enough that she would notice the danger label and either heed it, which would prove nothing, or violate it, which would prove intent. The balance required imagination without risk. The answer came from the back corner of the yard, where a hobby hid in plain sight: beekeeping. Bees are perfect for theater. They evoke primal fear, buzz loudly, and look formidable. But the law, common sense, and morality forbid using real stinging bees to frighten or harm someone. What was needed was the idea of bees, the illusion of danger without a real risk. The decoy had to produce an unmistakable reaction while remaining physically harmless, a performance within a performance. An observation hive provided the starting point. A small wooden box with a plexiglass side used by beekeepers to demonstrate hive activity. That was the shell. Inside, a Bluetooth speaker would play a recorded hum of a furious swarm at the press of a button. A spring-loaded flap would unleash a puff of harmless yellow chalk dust, simulating a burst of pollen and motion. To complete the illusion, a handful of drone bees, the male members of the colony without stingers, would be placed inside on a sugar water pad. Drones look large and menacing but are physically incapable of stinging. The result would be a dramatic scene with sound, sight, and motion, unsettling but safe. Legal caution required a final critical piece: explicit, unambiguous warning. If anyone opened the box after reading a clear label that said, "Warning, live bees, do not open," it would be undeniable that the act was a choice. That sign needed to be inside the mailbox door so it would be visible only when the door was opened. It would leave no room for the classic excuse of, "I didn't see it." For the law, a deliberate decision to reach past a warning is the difference between accident and intent. We needed the difference to be documented. The mechanics of the decoy were assembled with practical care. The speaker was hidden under the observation box, connected to a tiny motion sensor that could also be triggered remotely. The spring flap was calibrated to release a modest puff of chalk dust, enough to create an image on camera and a startle reflex, not enough to irritate eyes. Each drone was handled gently and kept in a ventilated cage until the moment. They were not confined in a way that would harm them, and later plans were in place to relocate them to a local organic farms pollinator program, ensuring they would thrive rather than become props to discard. The warning label was printed in unmistakable colors: bright yellow background, bold black lettering, laminated to withstand weather. It read more than words, it read intent. The label was affixed to the inside of the mailbox door with removable tape, positioned so that anyone opening the door would see it instantly. No argument could later be made about not seeing the sign. Finally, the surveillance matrix was tested. Camera angles were checked, lighting verified at dusk, microphones fine-tuned. We practiced playback speed, synchronized clocks, and multiple redundancy copies saved in separate locations. Every step had a backup, and each backup had one more. The last thing the plan needed was a technical failure or a corrupted clip. Throughout it all, restraint remained the rule. The aim was not humiliation for sport but clarity for justice. The aim was not to provoke danger but to reveal a pattern. If Karen reacted harmlessly and walked away, the plan would have produced nothing but a valuable buffer of preparedness. If she violated the warning, the footage would show a deliberate decision to open another person's mailbox knowing the risk, which the postal inspector could use to build a case. The difference between those outcomes hinged on one trait Karen could rarely resist: curiosity coupled with control. While the trap was practical and precise, It also carried an emotional calculus. Provocation, even harmless, is still provocation. The choice to risk escalation had to be measured against the potential to fracture the neighborhood further. But after quiet nights of watched mailboxes and staged accusations, the line had been crossed already. The neighborhood had been robbed of its privacy and decorum. The plan sought only to return that dignity through evidence rather than vendetta. The final decision to proceed came with a tally of truths, the master key seen in her hand, the night she opened someone else's mailbox, the staged confrontation that left me vilified. The plan would not be stealthy in the cinematic sense. It would be transparent and documented. That transparency was its strength. If she chose to trigger the decoy, it would be because she could not resist inspecting what she believed she owned. On the day the decoy went into the mailbox, the sun was low and the light was thin and honest. The wooden box fit snugly in the assigned slot, the warning label taped inside the door, the speaker silent but at the ready. Cameras blinked in their housings like patient witnesses. The microphone rock listened to wind and distant traffic. Evidence doesn't shout, it waits. It watches. It records. Then the waiting began, the slow, taut kind of patience that feels like tension coiled inside a fist. Neighbors moved through their days in usual rhythms, watering plants and walking dogs, unaware that a single moment of choice would change everything. Waiting is a strange thing. It clarifies what really matters, separating impulse from intent, and in that waiting the plan felt not like revenge but like a careful correction of an injustice. It was a trap born of law and necessity, not malice. If justice required exposure, then exposure would be done cleanly. On a recorded stage the inspector could review with dispassionate eyes. When a tyrant has all the performative tools, only one weapon remains effective against them: documentation. The plan had been built to deliver it. The mailbox was set. The cameras recorded. The warning glared in yellow and black. The decoy sat silent and patient. All that was left was for Karen to act. The trap waited for 3 days before anything happened. 3 long days of still mornings and measured evenings, when each sound of tires on asphalt sent a jolt through the chest. The decoy sat inside the mailbox like a secret heartbeat, small and silent beneath its yellow warning label. Cameras watched. The microphone listened. Every dusk carried the question of whether tonight would be the night she returned to prove that nothing was beyond her reach. On the 3rd evening, the light faded into the color of old honey. Lawn sprinklers hissed in the distance, and the hum of insects blurred with the faint electric buzz of porch lights switching on. From the garage window, the wide-angle camera blinked its steady red signal. The drive contained a week of routine. Delivery trucks, joggers, children on bicycles. None of that mattered. The recording of one deliberate trespass would outweigh hours of normal life. At 7:42 p.m., motion triggered the first alert. The golf cart glided into the frame, lights dimmed to half. She had returned to her rounds, casual, confident, the clipboard balanced across the steering wheel like a crown on a throne. Every movement betrayed comfort. She had survived confrontation once. She believed herself untouchable now. Karen parked beneath the street lamp, stepped out, and scanned the row of mailboxes. The camera caught her in perfect profile. The tilt of her chin, the way her hand rested on the latch of the communal panel before she moved toward individual boxes. She was humming, softly, faintly, perhaps to steady herself, perhaps as a nervous habit. The sound carried across the microphone feed, blending with the faint rustle of evening wind. She stopped at our mailbox. Her body blocked the number for a moment, but the camera at the trim saw it clearly. The pause, the quick glance over her shoulder, the small satisfied smile of someone about to cross a forbidden line. The yellow warning glowed faintly under the lamplight. Warning: live bees, do not open. The letters were clear, deliberate, unmistakable. She read them. Her head tilted. For a moment, her posture shifted between curiosity and calculation. Then arrogance won. Her hand moved. The latch clicked. Inside the mailbox, the motion sensor awakened. The speaker released its programmed hum, a dense angry buzz that spilled into the still night like electricity. Simultaneously, the spring-loaded flap burst open, releasing a soft cloud of yellow chalk dust. To the camera, it looked like a swarm erupting from darkness. Karen jerked backward, startled by the sound and the sudden color cloud. The footage slowed that moment to cinematic clarity. The widening of her eyes, the flinch, the reflexive backward step. The harmless drone bees, fat, slow, unable to sting, floated lazily into the air, glinting gold in the streetlight. Their presence completed the illusion. What followed was chaos framed in perfect symmetry. She stumbled, waving her arms in blind panic, the clipboard dropping to the ground with a hollow clap. Her voice rose into a frantic scream that echoed off the identical facades of the houses. Within seconds, she collapsed onto the grass, clutching her throat, gasping words that blurred into the night. An allergy, an attack, a plea for help. Neighbors emerged from their porches like startled birds. Curtains twitched, phones recorded, voices murmured. The sound of sirens followed quickly. Someone had called emergency services. The entire street lit with flashing red and blue reflections against manicured hedges. Paramedics arrived with calm efficiency. Their voices, captured faintly on the microphone feed, were professional, detached. They examined her, checked pulse and skin, lifted her carefully onto a gurney. No swelling. No hives. No stings. Only chalk dust and humiliation. The drones still drifted lazily near the mailbox, harmless witnesses to her theater. The footage caught everything. The label in clear view. The moment of hesitation before she reached in. The sequence of panic that followed. There was no ambiguity left, only evidence. When the sirens faded, the neighborhood stood in stunned silence. Neighbors whispered theories. A bee attack, a prank, a misunderstanding. Karen's absence left behind a vacuum of noise. Her golf cart remained parked beside the curb, headlights dimmed, clipboard on the grass, her authority reduced to litter. Later that night, the quiet returned, thicker now, weighted with realization. Inside the house, the recordings were reviewed frame by frame. Each camera offered a perspective. The wide shot showing her arrival, the close-up of her hand on the latch, the interior view of her face framed by the open door and the warning sign. The footage had a strange beauty, an accidental choreography of arrogance meeting consequence. Evidence is emotionless. It doesn't gloat or justify, it simply exists. Watching it removed anger and replaced it with certainty. For weeks, the story had been one person's word against another's. Now it was pixels, timestamps, and sound waves. Truth, preserved digitally beyond denial. At midnight, the final copy was exported and stored on multiple drives. One went into a safety deposit box. Another into a cloud folder labeled USPS Inspection. The rest of the footage was archived. The plan's second half, submission to authorities, would begin at dawn. Sleep came shallow and brief. Dreams flickered with images of bees, mailboxes, and the hum of electric tires. The mind replays tension long after it ends, as if verifying that the moment really happened. By morning, the shock had settled into calm purpose. When the sun rose, dew sparkled on the grass where she had fallen. The chalk dust had washed into faint yellow streaks along the sidewalk. The mailbox, cleaned and closed, looked ordinary again, anonymous among its identical siblings. Only the cameras knew what had transpired. News traveled faster than expected. By noon, phones buzzed with messages. Neighbors checking on the incident, wondering whether the bees had been exterminated, speculating about liability. Each rumor twisted the story slightly, turning caution into attack, misunderstanding into malice. In every version, she remained the victim. That was her talent, control the narrative before facts could breathe. But this time, the narrative would not belong to her. The video, time-stamped and clear, would rewrite it. The truth would move from whisper to record, from speculation to official evidence. That afternoon, a calm drive led to the small regional post office that handled the neighborhood's route. Inside, under fluorescent lights, an officer from the Postal Inspection Service listened patiently, then watched the footage without interruption. His expression stayed neutral, professional, the way people look when truth doesn't surprise them but confirms what they suspected. When the video ended, he nodded once, a small gesture that carried the weight of procedure beginning. Investigation is slow by design. Bureaucracy crawls so that facts cannot be rushed or diluted. The report would take weeks. But time no longer mattered. Proof existed, immutable and quiet. Back home, the neighborhood returned to its uneasy routine. The golf cart disappeared for several days. The HOA emails went silent. For the first time in months, no notices appeared taped to doors. The absence felt louder than her presence had ever been. Yet beneath that calm, there was anticipation. Everyone sensed the pause before the next movement of the story. Because people like Karen rarely accept silence. They return to reclaim the stage they believe they own. When she did return, it would not be as a ruler but as a defendant of her own making. 2 nights after the incident, the neighborhood inboxes pinged simultaneously with a new email. The subject line, written in capital letters, announced, "Emergency HOA Meeting, Community Safety Concerns." The message beneath it bore the familiar tone of bureaucratic righteousness, couched in words about unity and order. Attendance was strongly encouraged. Attendance was never optional when Karen Johnson wanted an audience. For the first time in months, she had been quiet. Now, she was ready to speak again. The silence that had blanketed the cul-de-sac trembled. People who once avoided conflict found themselves strangely eager to attend. The story of the bee attack had circulated in endless variations, each more exaggerated than the last. Some said she had been hospitalized. Others whispered she was pressing charges. Everyone wanted to see the performance unfold. The community clubhouse, normally used for yoga classes and birthday parties, transformed that evening into a courtroom without a judge. Rows of folding chairs faced the front podium beneath the soft hum of fluorescent lights. The air smelled of carpet cleaner and anticipation. By 7 p.m., nearly every seat was filled. Conversations were hushed, punctuated by the occasional nervous laugh. Karen arrived last, flanked by 2 loyal board members like ceremonial guards. She moved slowly, a scarf draped dramatically around her neck, a brace wrapped stiffly around her wrist, both unnecessary accessories that turned injury into costume. In her hand she carried a folder thick with printed documents, her props for the show. She took her place at the podium, adjusted the microphone, and let the silence settle. Her voice, when it came, was steady but quivering at the edges, an actress mimicking fragility. She spoke of trauma, of unprovoked danger, of an act of hostility committed against a community official performing her duties. Her tone swelled and softened in practiced rhythm, each pause calculated to draw sympathy. She described the attack as a near-death experience, invoking allergies, emergency responders, the horror of almost losing consciousness. As she spoke, faces in the crowd shifted. Some nodded in empathy. Others frowned. Many looked confused, torn between habit and doubt. The charm that had once cowed them was faltering under the weight of its own exaggeration. Then came the accusation. Without naming names, she referenced a homeowner who had deliberately placed a hazardous object inside a federal mailbox, who had endangered the safety of an HOA officer, who should be removed from the community for the well-being of all residents. Her voice sharpened on that last phrase, transforming from victim to prosecutor. A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Eyes darted toward me. The pattern was predictable. This was how control worked. Build a narrative, plant fear, let silence do the rest. When she finished her speech, she lowered her head, feigning exhaustion, and gestured toward a printed letter she claimed to have sent to law enforcement. The paper fluttered theatrically. The performance was flawless, except for one fatal flaw. The cameras had already rewritten her script. The chairperson, a quiet man who had never challenged her before, cleared his throat and asked whether anyone had a response. That small question cracked the air open. My wife stood. Her movements were calm, deliberate. She carried a laptop in one hand and a small projector in the other. The gesture drew immediate attention. Even Karen blinked, uncertain. My wife didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue or accuse. She simply stated that a recording existed, one that showed exactly what had happened. The projector whirred softly, casting a rectangle of light on the white clubhouse wall. The first frame appeared. The mailbox row beneath the street lamp, still and ordinary. The room hushed. Then the motion began. Karen's golf cart rolled into view. Her figure stepped out. She glanced around, reading the warning sign, then reached in. The sound of the latch clicking echoed faintly through the speaker system. A second later, the buzz of the recorded swarm filled the room. People flinched instinctively, the illusion still potent even in playback. Then came the chalk burst, the harmless yellow bloom caught in perfect detail, and her ensuing panic. The recording showed her stumbling, collapsing, grasping her throat while the harmless drones drifted lazily past her. There was no swarm, no sting, no attack. Only theater. Gasps spread through the room. Some whispered disbelief. Others covered their mouth. On screen, the evidence continued its quiet destruction of her narrative. Paramedics examining her, calm and unconcerned, neighbors standing nearby, unharmed. The truth played out like a slow unraveling of fabric, every thread of her story pulled loose. The final frame froze on the warning label, bold letters, perfectly legible. Live bees, do not open. When the lights came back, the room was different. The illusion of her authority had shattered under fluorescent light and recorded fact. She stood at the podium, pale and speechless, her mouth slightly open, searching for words that refused to arrive. The scarf around her neck looked suddenly theatrical, absurd. Then another voice spoke. From the back of the room, a neighbor rose, an older woman who had long avoided conflict. In her hand she held her phone, the screen glowing with a series of text messages. She explained, voice trembling but resolute, that these messages were from Karen herself. They showed her laughing about the incident hours after it happened, bragging that she would teach a lesson to the mailbox maniac, boasting that everyone will take my side. The message thread passed from hand to hand until it reached the board table. The last message, time-stamped only a day after the supposed attack, read simply, "They'll believe anything." That line silenced the room. The chairperson looked stricken. The other board members avoided eye contact. Karen's composure fractured. The control she wielded through posture and tone evaporated. She tried to speak, but words came out in fragments, half-denials tangled with nervous laughter. Every defense sounded hollow. Silence followed. Heavy, collective, the kind that marks the moment a group turns against its leader. Then came the murmur of motion. Someone in the crowd called for a vote, an emergency measure of no confidence. The phrase spread quickly, echoing around the room, gathering momentum. People who had once feared her now raised their hands, one after another, until the gesture filled the space like a wave. The result was unanimous. Karen Johnson was officially removed from her position as HOA president. The sound of the decision was not loud, not celebratory. It was quiet, final, like a door clicking shut. She stood frozen at the podium for a heartbeat longer, then gathered her folder with shaking hands. Papers spilled onto the floor. No one bent to help. As she turned to leave, a figure stepped forward from the side of the room, tall, composed, wearing the dark jacket of a federal inspector. It was Officer Ramos from the Postal Inspection Service. He introduced himself with calm authority and presented a document to her, an official citation for mail tampering under federal law. No shouting followed, no defense, only the rustle of paper as she accepted it with trembling fingers. The inspector's tone remained professional but unyielding. The law, at last, had entered the story she had written for herself. When she walked out, the room remained still. The projector light glowed faintly against the blank wall, illuminating the dust in the air. For the first time in months, there was no sound of golf cart tires on pavement, no email alerts, no warnings taped to doors. Only the fragile quiet of people realizing that control had finally changed hands. The meeting ended slowly, with neighbors lingering, exchanging uncertain smiles. They spoke in hushed tones about how they had let fear silence them for so long, about how relief felt strange after so much tension. The rebellion hadn't been loud. It had been factual, precise, undeniable. Outside, the night was cool and still. The streetlights buzzed softly over rows of identical mailboxes, each one closed, ordinary, private once again. The air smelled faintly of grass and freedom. For the first time in what felt like forever, the neighborhood belonged to its residents again. The night of the meeting became a dividing line in the history of our quiet cul-de-sac. Before it, fear was the rule. After it, silence became something different, an exhale that had waited too long to escape. The next morning, the neighborhood woke to the echo of absence. Karen's golf cart no longer patrolled the street. Her porch, once lit at all hours, sat in shadow. The handwritten notices that used to flutter on doors were gone. For the first time in nearly a year, the hum of lawnmowers and laughter returned, tentative at first, as if the sound itself feared being fined. People began stepping onto porches again, talking in driveways, reclaiming the small rituals she had stolen. It wasn't joy yet, it was disbelief slowly turning into relief. But revolutions, even small suburban ones, never end in a single night. They unravel slowly, piece by piece, as the defeated try to rewrite their downfall. By midweek, emails began appearing again, this time not from the HOA board but from Karen's personal address. The tone had changed from command to complaint. She called the meeting a setup, the footage edited, the evidence unethical. Her words arrived in bursts of denial and desperation, paragraphs thick with capital letters and half-legal phrases she had copied from the internet. She copied neighbors, local officials, even the postal inspector himself, trying to flood the inboxes that once carried her decrees. The replies, if any, were short and polite. The power she once had, the fear that made people respond instantly, was gone. Her emails went unanswered, her demands unread. Power is not lost all at once, it fades as people stop reacting. The following week, a plain white car pulled into her driveway early in the morning. The federal emblem on the side was small but unmistakable. Officer Ramos stepped out with another inspector and a folder tucked under his arm. The meeting in her doorway was brief. The footage had become part of an official report. The master key she had used was confirmed as unauthorized, borrowed from a local contractor in violation of postal regulations. The conversation ended with paperwork and a thin envelope that carried far more weight than any notice she had ever issued. After they left, her blinds closed and never reopened. 4 days, the house across the street seemed to shrink. The hedges went untrimmed. The mailbox, once polished to mirror shine, gathered dust. Her golf cart disappeared altogether. The neighborhood observed quietly, half curious, half cautious. The same people she had once ruled now passed by her driveway without acknowledgement. There was no revenge in it, only distance, the kind that grows naturally when respect has died. Inside her house, she must have felt it too. The slow erosion of control. People like Karen survive on attention, and when that attention turns away, they begin to unravel. One evening, a moving truck appeared. It was unmarked, plain white, the kind used for small relocations. 2 men loaded boxes for hours under the dull orange glow of the streetlight. Curtains parted quietly in other homes, watching without comment. She stood near the doorway, hair tied back, eyes fixed downward. The neighborhood that once feared her now observed her like a memory being packed away. She didn't speak to anyone. Not a wave, not a glare. Only once did she glance toward my house. The look wasn't anger, it was something more hollow, a mix of disbelief and resignation. People who believe they are above consequence never know how to react when it finally arrives. By the next morning, the beige house stood empty. The golf cart was gone. The HOA office keys were returned by mail. The official notice of her resignation arrived a week later, stamped and signed by the interim board. The language was polite, almost sterile, describing her departure as voluntary. But everyone knew the truth. It wasn't resignation, it was exile. And yet, her absence left behind something unexpected. In the vacuum of her control, the neighborhood began to rediscover itself. The first sign of that came from the Hendersons, the elderly couple who had once kept their blinds closed after she fined them for a birdbath. One morning, a new wooden bench appeared in their front yard, painted bright blue. It broke every shade rule she had ever written, and everyone loved it. Within a week, another house added a sunflower flag. Someone else repainted their front door a shade of green that wasn't on her approved list. Slowly, color returned to the street, like spring pushing through a long winter. The new HOA board was composed of people who had avoided leadership before. The quiet ones, the kind who believe rules exist to protect, not punish. Their first act was symbolic but powerful. They voted unanimously to repeal Article 7, Section 4B, the infamous Mailbox Hygiene and Security Clause. It was erased from the record. A letter followed, this time not printed on official paper, not stamped with Karen's signature, but written simply and sent to every home. It thanked residents for their patience and trust, reminded them that the HOA existed for maintenance, not control, and invited them to a community replanting day the following weekend. The event drew nearly everyone. Where Karen's rules had demanded compliance, the new board asked for participation. Neighbors brought flowers, tools, food. Laughter returned to the soundscape of the cul-de-sac. The very spot near the mailboxes where the confrontation had occurred was transformed into a small garden bed. Someone suggested planting lavender and bee balm, flowers that would attract pollinators. The idea spread instantly, and by afternoon, shovels turned soil where fear had once grown. As people worked, conversations bloomed. Stories spilled out, quiet confessions of how frightened they had been to speak up, how guilty they felt for staying silent, how strange it was to breathe freely again. What Karen had built through intimidation was being undone through shared work and color. That night, as twilight settled, I stood by the mailbox garden. The scent of lavender drifted through the air, mixing with earth and dew. Bees hovered lazily among the flowers, oblivious to the symbolism humans attached to them. In their quiet industry there was peace. From that spot, the memories replayed like distant echoes, the flicker of headlights, the click of a latch, the sound of panic under a street lamp. Those moments no longer carried anger. They had become part of the story that turned the neighborhood back toward itself. Justice doesn't always arrive with spectacle. Sometimes it looks like ordinary evenings, children playing without fear, people waving across driveways. The fall of Karen wasn't a collapse in flames, it was a slow dissolving of power, washed away by truth and time. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the Postal Inspection Service. It was short, factual, unemotional. The investigation had concluded. The violation was documented, fines assessed, and recommendations filed for administrative review. It ended with a simple sentence: tampering confirmed. Case closed. That was all. No drama, no headlines. Just closure. The document went into a drawer, not as a trophy but as a reminder. Power built on fear is fragile. It looks solid until it meets someone willing to look it in the eye and refuse to flinch. Months passed. The seasons shifted. The garden by the mailboxes thrived, buzzing softly under the summer sun. Each flower carried the color she had once forbidden, each bee a quiet testament to the balance that had returned. The story spread beyond our block, carried by whispers and retellings. It became the neighborhood's cautionary tale, a reminder that control disguised as care is still control. People told it with half smiles, the way survivors talk about storms after they've passed. And somewhere far away, perhaps in another cul-de-sac, another HOA president might have read about it, frowning, sensing a boundary drawn not by law but by example. Karen's name faded, her legend replaced by the sound of bees and laughter, by front yards filled with color and mailboxes left unguarded. The tyranny of paperwork had ended not with rebellion but with restoration. In the end, her fall wasn't about defeat. It was about the return of balance, the reminder that even in the smallest, neatest neighborhoods, truth will always find its way through the cracks, buzzing softly, patient as nature itself. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest stories. Months passed, and what had once been chaos settled into rhythm again. The neighborhood healed the way people do after a long illness, slowly, cautiously, rediscovering what normal felt like. The sound of sprinklers returned, the smell of barbecue drifted on Sunday afternoons, and porch lights glowed late into summer nights without fear of inspection. The memory of Karen Johnson became like a shadow at noon, faint, present only when someone mentioned the old days. The tyranny of notices, fines, and patrols had become folklore, retold with disbelief that they had once been real. Children who had been too young to understand now played near the mailboxes without hesitation, their laughter a declaration that peace had reclaimed the street. Where the confrontation had once unfolded, the community garden had become the center of life. The space that used to smell of dust and tension now bloomed with lavender, daisies, and wildflowers. Bees hovered lazily between petals, the air alive with the hum of creation rather than conflict. The old mailbox, the very one she had opened, stood beside the flowers, freshly painted, polished but unguarded. It had become a symbol of privacy and freedom, not control. Every season brought something new. In spring, neighbors planted tulip. In summer, they added birdhouses. In autumn, pumpkins lined the curb, their cheerful colors once banned now celebrated. The rules that used to dictate sameness were replaced with encouragement for expression. The HOA no longer sent threats, it sent newsletters filled with gratitude and community updates. The tone had changed from authority to belonging. The new president, a retired teacher named Evelyn, had a gentle voice and an easy laugh. She reminded people that Homeowners Association was meant to be exactly that, an association of homeowners, not a throne for one. Her leadership worked through listening, not enforcing. Under her, the word meeting stopped meaning punishment and started meaning coffee and conversation. What had been built from fear was being rebuilt from trust. The garden by the mailboxes grew denser each year, tended by many hands. Every Saturday morning, the same group of volunteers came to water, prune, and talk about ordinary things. Sometimes, newcomers to the neighborhood would ask why the garden was there, why it had such an unusual mix of flowers and that single gleaming mailbox standing proudly at its edge. The answer always began with a smile and ended with a phrase everyone knew. It's a long story about bees, rules, and freedom. The story carried laughter now, not anger. It had turned from scandal into parable. As for me, I found peace in simple moments. Morning walks, friendly waves from neighbors who had once avoided eye contact, the quiet reassurance that privacy was again respected. The cameras that had once been weapons of evidence now served simpler purposes. Watching the garden bloom, capturing sunsets, recording memories instead of proof. Every so often, when I passed the mailbox, I would notice the faint scratches still etched into the metal from that night, tiny marks near the latch, almost invisible. I never repainted over them. They were reminders of how close ordinary life can come to collapsing under small acts of control, and how quickly dignity can return when truth is given room to breathe. Justice hadn't needed anger. It had only needed light. The federal report remained filed away in a folder, its language dry and factual. Unauthorized use of postal access device. Confirmed tampering. Case closed. Those 4 words, case closed, were more than a legal conclusion, they were a symbolic one. A boundary had been redrawn not by confrontation but by evidence and patience. Sometimes, late at night, the mind revisits old noise. I would remember the sound of her golf cart in the distance, that electric were that used to mean inspection and anxiety. In those moments, I realized that silence had become the sweetest sound of all. Months turned to a year. The garden became the pride of the neighborhood. Local newspapers wrote short features about a community reborn through cooperation. They photographed children painting small bee symbols on stepping stones, each one unique. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The creature once used to symbolize fear had become a symbol of harmony. Even the bees seemed to understand. Their quiet labor became a metaphor whispered between neighbors. Work steadily, protect the hive, but never sting unless threatened. They thrived among the flowers that had replaced her rules, turning sunlight into honey while people turned memory into forgiveness. Karen herself was never seen again. Rumors said she moved several towns away, into another planned community. Perhaps she tried to rebuild her small empire there. Perhaps she didn't. It didn't matter. Some lessons follow a person no matter where they go. Others linger behind, shaping those who witness them. In the end, her name became a cautionary echo rather than a curse. The story was no longer about revenge. It was about restoration, the way a neighborhood found its soul again through truth and a bit of clever planning. Every so often, someone new to the block would ask what started it all. The answer always began the same way, with a letter. A letter taped to a door. A rule no one wanted. A line no one else dared to cross. And then, a plan that buzzed with quiet justice. The story usually ended with laughter, the kind born from hindsight. But beneath the laughter lived gratitude, gratitude that the community had faced something ugly and come out stronger, more connected. Gratitude that privacy had been defended without violence. Gratitude that the hum of bees had become the sound of peace. One evening near the end of summer, the setting sun turned the street gold. Shadows stretched long over driveways and lawns. Children chased each other around the garden, their laughter drifting between blossoms. I stood by the mailbox, watching bees dance through lavender, and thought about how strange it was that something so small, a letter, a latch, a hum, could change an entire neighborhood. The air carried the scent of honey and cut grass. Somewhere a wind chime rang. Life had returned to balance. The story had finished where it began, at a mailbox beneath a street lamp, under the watch of quiet skies. The queen who once ruled through fear was gone. The real queens, the bees, remained, building calmly, working together, protecting the hive that now belonged to everyone. Justice didn't roar in this place. It hummed softly in the air, golden and alive, reminding anyone who listened that truth, like nature, always finds a way to bloom again.